Twennesty, oh ye, welcome back to the Candle Tales podcast, where we tell Irish myth set to original music. My name's Aaron, and in this episode we're taking a break from our current Fianna series to bring you an episode to tie in with the love season that's going on right now. Let's bring you some love stories. This story is going all the way back to episode 13, the story of Midir and Etain, told by my sister Sorcha. Of course, she's included the Not So Happy Ever After ending, but for more love stories you can go onto our YouTube playlist. We've created a whole new playlist for previous love stories, so go check that out. Follow the link in the bio, like and subscribe to help us grow that channel over there, and watch more videos that we'll be posting up there soon. To continue to listen to our reflections and our chats on our current series, to get exclusive content and support this podcast, you can join our Candlelit crew by following the links in the description below. But for now, hey, Sorcha, tell us the story, will you?
The king and queen of Bray, Midir and Fuamnach, had a great and famous household. Midir was a great king, his queen Fuamnach was his equal in every way, and besides that she was herself a powerful druid. They were known throughout Ireland for being so well matched and so well balanced that they were chosen by innumerable families to foster their children, to raise them up with all the values of the culture, all the security of a good home, and to be an example of how a good marriage and a good household should be run. This was a great honour, and so honoured were they that at any one time Midir and Fuamnach had 3 times 50 foster sons and 3 times 50 foster daughters in their household, although they never had children of their own. Now one day the king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Dagda Mór, he came to them with a small problem, and that small problem was a child, a little infant boy that he had had with the river goddess Boann. Trouble was, Boann was married to another man, and the little boy had been born in a day, a magically extended day that the Dagda had made so the two of them could dally together while her husband Elkmar was away hunting, suspecting nothing. But now they had this child, this consequence, and they didn't really know what to do with him. He was younger than anybody because he'd been born in a day, and so he was named Angus Oge, the young son. And the Dagda, after racking his brains, well, he brought the child to the best parents that he knew of, Midir and Fuamnach. Angus was an easy child to love. The pair of them took him in and found him to be a beautiful and a winning child that they raised as if he were their own, and they both doted on him. And he filled up something in their marriage that they hadn't realised had been missing, brought some bit of light and life and joy to them that they hadn't known to miss. Now, Angus grew up, as children tend to do, and Midir took him to meet his father, the Dagda. The Dagda welcomed his long-lost son in with open arms, and Midir left him to get settled and situated as the son of a powerful man and a powerful woman, though he wasn't quite sure how that was going to be managed, what with Boann's jealous husband Elkmar hovering in the wings, ready to take offence if he ever found out Angus's true identity. But in any case, Midir went home. Now when he went home, he noticed it. The thing that had been missing, that had been filled up by the presence of Angus Oge, that light and that laughter that wasn't there in his house, that wasn't there in his marriage. And he noticed it grow and grow, because now that he'd seen it, he couldn't unsee it. And every day he looked at Fuamnach and he wondered when the love for her had left his heart. He wondered, had he ever loved her really? Or had he just been impressed by her power and her beauty. And these doubts grew on him, and the space between him and his wife grew wider and colder with every passing day, until the day came that Midir decided to do something about it. And what he decided to do was leave and go and visit his foster son Angus Oge. He left Fuamnach in charge of their 3 times 50 foster sons and their 3 times 50 foster daughters and all their lands and all their households and all their kine and all their cattle. He dressed himself very carefully in his finest armour, his cloak of green and his 5-pointed spear by his side, and he rode out on a white horse to visit. He arrived at Brúna, where Angus Oge then lived, at Samhain, a time of the year when it was forbidden to carry weapons, when the laws were strange and different even for those who lived in the other world. Now, the pair of them came out to the side of the hill to watch a game of hurling that was happening in the valley below them, and Midir pointed out to Angus that there was a man standing on the hillside opposite them, glaring over at Angus Oge as if he hated him. And Angus said, well, yeah, that would be Elkmar, my mother's husband. You see, Brúna had been Elkmar's house, and with the help of the Dagda, Angus Oge had tricked him out of it. No, it was what his mother Boann wanted for him, but she couldn't exactly tell Elkmar that, so Elkmar was holding on to a bit of a grudge. And then a fight broke out in the hurling match in the valley below, and Angus Oge made to go down and settle it, but Midir noticed a strange glint in the eye of Elkmar over there on the hill opposite, and he stopped him and said, I'll go down and you stay here. I don't trust this. Midir waded into the fight and tried to pacify it, but he was set upon by these youths who had been told what to do by Elkmar himself. He was struck in the side of the head with a hurl so hard that his eye was knocked out of his skull. Now this was a terrible wound. More terrible than just the wound itself was the meaning of the wound, because in those days no man could be a king if he was in any way disfigured or deficient in body. And Midir was the king of Bray. He stood to lose everything. He was absolutely livid. Now Angus was distraught. Angus Oge brought Midir back up to Brúna, called in the best surgeons in the land, and they managed to save Midir's eye, to get it back into his head, to get it healthy again, so that he would not lose his kingship. But Midir was still furious. And he turned to his foster son and he said, you need to make this up to me. You need to pay me restitution because this happened in your household when I was protecting you. And Angus said he would do anything for his foster father. Midir asked him for a new chariot, and that was easily got. And he asked him for a new pair of horses, and that was easily got as well. And then he turned to Angus Oge and he said, what I really want, the thing that will make this all better, I want you to find me the most beautiful woman in Ireland. That last one was a tall order. Angus Oge searched far and wide until he found the most beautiful woman in Ireland, a woman named Etain. Now she was a king's daughter in Ulster, and she was something else to look at. She was beautiful beyond any concept of beauty that he had ever come across before. And Angus went to her and he asked her if she would come with him to Brúna and take up residence there with Midir for a year. And Etain looked at him and said, "Now, why would I want to do a thing like that?" She pointed out to him that her beauty and her status were two things that she had that she could put in the service of her people, that her best hope for them was to make a good match in marriage, to bring the power of a great king to their service, to bring them a huge bride price for her honour, and by going with him to stay with Midir for a year, her honour stood to take a bit of a hit. But Angus begged and Angus pleaded, and Angus was such a lovable young man, being a god of love, that Etain found it difficult to say no to him. And so she thought about it, and she said, "Okay, so I won't go with you, lest it devalue me in the eyes of one who might marry me. So what you need to do is make up for any loss in value that might happen to me and to my reputation. So here's what you're going to do. You are going to clear 3 plains and plant them all, and you are going to divert 3 rivers so that they can irrigate those plains for the benefit of my people. And you are going to fetch me my weight in gold as a bride price, and if you do these things, then I will go with you." Angus Oge, being Angus Oge, he managed these tasks in the twinkling of an eye, and he brought Etain back to Bruneboyne to meet Midir. Midir was smitten the moment he saw Etain, and Etain, somewhat to her surprise, found herself falling for the proud king of Bray in her turn. They lingered in Bruneboyne together for a year, living in bliss and in harmony, and Angus was so delighted to see his foster father well and happy once again. At the end of that year, Midir realised that he had been a long time away from his home, and he offered Etain a place in his household. She told him that she would not be put beneath anyone else in his household. She would marry him, but she'd be second fiddle to no other woman, and Midir thought that was absolutely fine. And so, with nary a word sent ahead to his wife Fuamnach, who'd been holding down the fort at home for all this time, Midir brought Etain back to his house at Bray. Now, it was not unheard of for a man to have 2 wives in those days, or a woman to have 2 husbands, but Fuamnach was a little taken aback when her husband brought this woman into her household unannounced, without a by your leave. But she was prepared to welcome Etain in, as long as she knew her place. And so she brought them inside, poured them each a drink, greeted them, cordially, if a little cautiously, and watched to see what this woman would do. Etain took a look at Fuamnach, and she took a long look around the hall of Midir, and she saw the seat of Midir there at the top table, and she saw beside it the seat that belonged to his wife. And without a moment's pause, she went and sat herself at the head of the table, right beside Midir. Now Fuamnach took that for the insult that it most certainly was. It might be that Midir had forgotten that she was a druid, or it might be that he never thought that she would turn her power against him, but Fuamnach's rage rose up in her like a live thing, and she belched it out with a word of power, and it flew to Etain sitting there so pretty in her chair, and when it hit her, Etain was gone, and there was nothing but a rain cloud in her place. You or I would have died of a spell like that, but Etain was one of the Tuatha De Danann as well, and she was not without power of her own. She clung to life As the rain cloud rained into a little puddle on the floor, the puddle evaporated and a little worm crawled out and turned into a fly. The fly, Etain, buzzed up to Midir and fluttered and flew around his head, and much to Fuamnach's disgust, Midir was not repelled that his beloved had become such a loathsome, lowly creature. He cooed at the fly as if it were something beautiful and wondrous. He exclaimed over the beautiful iridescent colours on its body. He said that the buzzing of its wings sounded like the sweetest of music. Could she not hear? Could she not smell the fragrance that wafted from the fly? She could not, but he could. And from that day on, there was nowhere Midir went without the fly Etain perched on his shoulder and buzzing about his head, while Fuamnach stewed on her rage. It was one thing to be put aside for a girl of surpassing beauty, but it was another thing to be ignored in favour of a fly, and so her anger rose up within her again. But this time it took a different form, more potent, more destructive. And when it came out of her this time, it came out in a spell that she cast and called down on the fly Etain, a great and powerful storm. The winds of that storm picked up the fly and blew her and buffeted her all around Ireland. She was helpless before it, driven by the winds and the rain. She was blown on the winds of Fuamnach's rage all the way to Brúnaboinne, and Angus Oge, he recognised the fly as the woman Etain. He caught her, rescued her from the storm and the tempest, and locked her in a little glass bower that he filled with flowers of every kind so that she would be happy and comfortable, as a fly could be. And then Angus Oge sent for Midir to come and fetch her. But Fuamnach came faster. She changed herself into a serpent, unlatched the glass bower, and called in her storm to blow Etain away. When Midir arrived, he found Etain was carried off beyond his power to save her, and Fuamnach triumphant. Enraged, Midir attacked his wife. He had Angus Oge hold down the only mother he had ever known, while he, Midir, cut her head from her shoulders. But Etain was still beyond his reach. The storm of Fuamnach's rage did not die with her. If anything, it grew stronger. It blew the fly Etain from one side of the country to another, whirled her around and up and down and over and under. She was befuddled and bewildered and battered and blown, and there was nothing she could do but surrender. Time passed. So much time that it lost all meaning. And then one day, she was blown in through the window of a feasting hall. And so exhausted was the fly Etain that she could not even cling to the roof beams of that feasting hall. She lost her grip and fell with a tiny splash into the goblet of wine on the table below her. The mortal queen of that hall drank off her goblet of wine in one swallow, swallowing down the fly Etain. And then she turned to her husband and said, "I do believe I am with child." Sure enough, 9 months later she gave birth to a most beautiful girl child, whom she named Etain, for no reason that she could put into words. The mortal girl Etain grew up and looked just as she had done in her previous life, as a radiantly beautiful woman of the Tuatha De Danann, but she had no memory of her life as one of the Sidhe, no memory of Midir or Fuamnach, or even her wretched existence as a fly blown about by that storm. Etain grew up to be a beautiful young woman who had a particularly elegant way of pouring wine, and word of her beauty and her grace spread far and wide. She received proposals of marriage from kings and sons of kings, but her heart was not warmed by any of them. Now at that time, the High King of Ireland, Oge was in want of a wife, for it was not thought to be right for a king to be without a queen in those days, and he decided that if he had to have a queen, he would have only the most beautiful woman in Ireland, and it was known that that meant Etain. For her part, Etain was no more in love with Oge than she was with any of her other suitors, but she accepted his offer because it meant becoming the Queen of Ireland, and she couldn't think of a reason not to. She and Oge were happy enough together, for a time. The only blight on their marriage was that the king's brother Ailill fell desperately ill shortly after Etain came to live in Tara. So ill was his brother Ailill that Oge was tempted to put off his tour of Ireland that he had to make every year in case his condition might worsen, but Etain offered to stay behind and look after him while Oge was gone. Almost as soon as he was out of the house, Ailill asked to speak to Etain alone, sending away all the servants and attendants, all the doctors and healers and clerics that were trying their best to cure him of this unknown disease. He confessed to her that he was sick for the love of her, and that if he could not be with her, he was going to die. This left Etain with a bit of a dilemma. She did not want to be the cause of her brother-in-law's death, but at the same time, she didn't think her husband would be terribly happy if she slept with his brother. So she had to ponder this for a little while. She thought it over, and then she told Ailill that she would meet him outside of Tara the following day for a tryst. She thought that at least if she met him outside of Tara, she wouldn't be betraying Oge in his own house, and so it wouldn't be quite as bad. At this news, Ailill leapt out of bed, hale and hearty once more, and went singing through the hallways. The following day, Etain waited in the appointed place for Ailill to come, already half regretting her choice. She saw her brother-in-law come towards her, and then as he approached, she saw him change. A light seemed to glow from his features, and then it was not Ailill who stood before her at all, but a much more beautiful-looking man, tall and handsome and shining, with a green cloak around his shoulders and a 5-pointed spear in his hand. Midir, for it was indeed he, told Etain how he had been searching for her all this time and begged her to come back to the other world with him. She had been lost to him for hundreds of years. In the time she had been away, lost in that terrible storm, Ireland had fallen to new rulers, to mortal men, and the Tuatha De Danann had gone underneath the hills, to the rivers and the waterways and the wilds, and he wanted to bring her back there to that land of eternal youth, where there was no pain, no sickness, no death even any more. And Etain had no idea who he was. Having no memory of her life in the other world, she categorically refused to go anywhere with this complete stranger. Besides which, she was in no way impressed with the trick he had pulled on her to get her outside the walls of Tara to approach her in this way. He'd caused her a great deal of suffering and distress, and she was not best pleased with him. And so Midir changed tack and went a little bit more softly, and rather than proposing that he take her away for all of eternity, he asked if she might consider giving him a little kiss, which Etain also refused. Midir begged and pleaded with Etain to kiss him just once, because he knew in his heart of hearts that if she kissed him, if her lips and his touched, he was sure that all of her love for him would come back, all of her memory of the other world would come back, and she'd be his again. But Etain was having absolutely none of it. Given that he had manipulated her into betraying her husband, she told him that she would only kiss him if he could get permission from her husband. And Etain knew well that that would never happen. Ochiaram was a proud man, and a jealous one too, possessive of his beautiful wife. And with that left on Midir's plate, she went back to Tara and forgot about the whole thing. Or tried to, anyway. When Ochiaram came back from his tour of Ireland, she very firmly told him absolutely nothing about how his brother Ailill had been magically cured of whatever disease he'd had, that nobody knew what it was even now, and she certainly didn't tell him about the beautiful stranger who wanted to whisk her away to the other world for all eternity, and claimed to have been in love with her in a past life. It seemed better that way. Ochiaram had not been back in Tara for very long when a beautiful man in a green cloak turned up at the gates. Now, recognising from his dress and his face that this man was possibly one of the Tuatha De Danann, Ochiaram greeted him with great respect and deference and made him welcome. The stranger asked to play a game of chess. They played, and Ochiaram won easily. The stranger suggested that they make a wager, and Ochiaram bet the finest horses that either of them could produce. And they played again, and again Ochiaram won. Knowing now that he was in possession of 2 horses of the Tuatha De Danann, he was excited to play again. In his excitement, Ochiaram suggested they play for higher stakes. The winner could ask the loser for any favour he desired. His mind was full of the things that he would ask this magical man to do, and Ochiaram was taken aback when the stranger beat him in only a couple of moves. He was even more taken aback when the stranger asked his forfeit, for Ochiaram to allow him to kiss his wife. Ochiaram was stumped, but he asked the stranger for a month's grace to get used to the idea. Midir, for it was of course he, left promising to return for his winnings in a month's time, and Ochiaram spent all of that month assembling his army, training them and equipping them and making them ready to repel any invasion. On the day that Midir was to return, he had the army surround Tara, man the walls, man the courtyards, bristling with shield and spear and sword, while he and his wife Etain stayed inside the feasting hall, surrounded by guards, row on row, all facing outwards with their spears at the ready. And so prepared he waited. But the stranger did not come to his gate. Instead, there was a bright light, and all of a sudden Midir was standing there before the 2 of them inside the circle of the soldiers, and he put out his hand to Etain, and he kissed her. And she remembered. She remembered everything her great love for Midir, the revenge of his wife, and as she kissed him, the two of them rose up into the air and disappeared into the other world, never to be seen again. Now it is here that the tale is ended, though it is not the end of this tale, and if you like a happy ending, it's best to stop listening now. Oge Aram was not pleased to lose his wife Etain. For 7 years he hunted for her high and low and all over Ireland, and the form of his hunt was to dig up the she-mounds of the Tuatha De Danann and destroy them, looking for a passage to the other world, looking for Etain and the man who had stolen her from him. At the end of 7 years, Midir appeared before Oge Aram over the latest she-mound that he was in the process of destroying and told him that he really needed to knock this off. Midir offered Oge Aram one chance to win Etain back. He snapped his fingers, and all of a sudden, standing there on the hillside were 50 women, and all of them identical, and all of them Etain. Midir told Oge Aram that if he could pick his wife out of that group of women, he would never see Midir again. He'd be able to take her back home, and all would be as it had been. Now Oge Aram knew by now the tricks of Midir, and so he knew he could not choose Etain by her looks, because there would be no difference in their looks. And so he said, all right, have them all pour wine, because Etain had that way of pouring wine, and he knew he would know it anywhere. And sure enough, he recognized Etain by her pour. He stopped the test at that one, and he brought her back to Tara with him. Now Etain seemed somewhat changed by her time in the other world. She seemed to have no memory of Tara, no memory of Oge Aram at all, but gradually she got used to the idea, got used to her new place, got used to her husband and her household, and she began to settle in. And then they were happy again, for a while. A year and a day after he had gotten her back from the other world, Oge Aram was pacing the walls of Tara. His wife Etain was in labour with their first child, and he was on tenterhooks. And it did not help his mood one bit when out of a shaft of light stepped Midir, his old rival. Now Oge Aram was ready to throw him out, said, "You promised I would never see you again." And Midir said, "Oh yes, I promised you would never see me again if you chose your wife. But you see, you didn't choose your wife. When she came with me to the other world, your wife Etain was pregnant with your child. A daughter she gave birth to in the other world, where time moves so differently. You chose a girl called Etain, for we named her after her mother. She grew up to look just like her mother, and besides that, she has her mother's way of pouring wine.